Hey guys, my name's Garth, and this is my honors thesis defense. So it's on security of campus ID cards and account systems. So kind of a roadmap for what I'm going to talk about. I'm mainly going to focus on like enterprise identity management as it relates to like a college campus. So like all these things are like stuff that you'd see in the enterprise, but things are done just a little bit differently because we're college. So I'm going to talk about stuff like ID cards, authentication, and the accounts and systems that are protected by this authentication. So during this talk, I'm going to be talking about those things, but I'm going to focus specifically on some of the security vulnerabilities that I found, how to fix those vulnerabilities and mitigate some risk, and some good standards to follow. Alright, so a little bit about who I am. I work for the solutions department in the Office of Technology. So I mainly fix broken things, I build new things, and I help improve security. So some qualifications. I almost have a degree in CS. I'm Security Plus certified, so that meets some fancy Department of Defense standard for information assurance. And I know some stuff about technology on a college campus. So why am I doing this? Basically, my research is a guideline for the hundreds of other universities and campuses that use systems that are almost exactly similar to ours. And the idea would be that other universities and enterprises could look at my research and use it as a baseline to compare against their own security measures. So throughout this, I'm going to point out bad things to avoid doing or stop doing now, and good standards to follow. And I'm also doing this because I care about privacy and the security of end users. So insert your typical legal disclaimer here. I'm a good guy. I'm doing security research for the greater good. I had permission for most of this stuff. Or at least some important people were aware that I was doing it. And my findings aren't really like a security threat. I'm not releasing any exploits or any specifics. I'm not helping any bad guys here. Alright, so the first part of this, let's talk about ID cards. So I did kind of like a regional comparison of how different college campuses do ID cards. So specifically I looked at the University of New Orleans, Louisiana State University, and Southeastern Louisiana University. And for Southeastern, I looked at the ID cards that we used before 2018, and I also looked at the new updated ID card format that we used starting this year and we will be using going forward. Alright, so let's talk about how we're supposed to identify somebody. So what belongs on an ID? I mean, we think about, a picture, a name, maybe some long, scary numbers. So all this stuff needs to be effective for being able to identify you physically and digitally. So physically, we think about things like on a college campus, you would want to physically look at somebody's picture on their ID, look at the person, see that they match, and then they're good. That would be an example of when you'd want to identify using a card for, say, test proctoring. LSU does picture ID verification for all their tests that they run. Another example would be like police. If they stopped you, they'd want to see your ID. So for digital verification, the ID itself would be used as the payment card. And it's also used here on campus for access control. So for example, if I have an ID card, that's all I need to get into like student dorms. Or if I have some specific student's ID card, that's all I need to get into the student dorms and then to their dorm room, for example. So two different ways in which this can be used, physical and digital. So let's talk about the mag stripe characteristics on the actual card. So if you flip the card over, you've got like this bar across the top, and that looks all fancy, and when you swipe it, somehow the data is transferred to the computer. Well, how that's actually done is through binary encoding, and we've got 3 tracks here of mag stripe. So if you actually dip the card in iron oxide powder, that's like iron powder, it will adhere to the magnetic part of the mag stripe. And so it looks more like a barcode now. So if we like zoom in and enhance, we can actually see like, this looks very much like a barcode, and it's the ones and zeros that make up the data on the card. So now that we understand kind of like how this data is encoded, we could swipe it and look at the data on it. So magstripe readers work like keyboards. If you buy a magstripe reader, it's usually USB, and you plug it in your computer, and then if you like swipe an ID card, all this stuff will get printed out to the screen. It works exactly like a keyboard. So I went ahead and swiped my ID card, and I got this text back. So basically we've got like this little colon here at the front is the start of the data. And this part right here identifies us as a university. This part right here is my actual W number. This is a check digit, which always appears to be 0 for my testing. And this tells you that you're at the end. So this top one here is my card, and this bottom one here is somebody else's card. And the important characteristic to note here is that the only data that's actually on the card is the W number. So if I ask, what's your W number, I now know everything that could possibly be on your magstripe card that you would use for like paying for stuff or going to a dorm room. And W numbers are public information, so this is bad. So there's a lot of research online on how to spoof identification cards. These are like mag stripes, so you're supposed to have to actually like swipe it. So it used to be back in the old day, once you knew like the data that you would want to encode, which would be the W number in this case, you'd go ahead and like make a fake ID card, and you'd like make it look like the real thing. And then you go ahead and actually encode the data on the mag stripe itself that you wanted. And then you could go ahead and use this fake ID and use it to pay stuff, or use it to gain access to a building, or whatever you wanted to do. Now, very recently, there was some research work done, and it's public on the internet. Basically, what it allows you to do is digitally spoof a ID card. So this is a microcontroller. And it's running some code that I found off the internet, and I modified to match the format of our university IDs. This here is a motor driver, and if you think about how motors work, they're like coils of magnetic wire, and that's how the motor spins. So think about motors in the sense that it creates an electromagnetic field. So instead of a motor, I've hooked up to this motor driver a coil of wire. So instead of spinning a motor, I'm just generating an electromagnetic field. And if you modulate it and stop it and start it, and you time it specifically, you can send out the same binary data that the card reader would see when you swiped an ID card. So essentially, I walk up to, say, a vending machine or an access control at a door, I hold this up to the card reader, I type in whatever W number I want, and it goes ahead and sends it as if I had swiped that actual ID card. And this is very nice for an attacker because this is all digital. This lets me simulate, however many ID numbers I want. For example, our W numbers is sequential, so I could just rip through all of them, thousands of them. Whereas in the old days, you'd have to print out and encode a physical card every time you wanted to test somebody's ID. We don't have to do that. You can actually be a hacker in the movies, where you hook this thing up to your door, and it scrolls through all the thousands of numbers that could possibly let you in, and you finally find the one, and you get it. So here's a program that I did. You can't really see the text, which is disappointing me. But over here, you basically just type in the W number, and you hit enter, and it goes out and sends the magstripe data. So that's the code that my microcontroller is running. Very, very simple. You just type in a number and go. So some lessons learned in using effective digital identification. We're talking about, what belongs on a card for physical ID, what needs to belong on it for a digital ID. Well, for digital ID, it would be really nice if the numbers on the mag stripe were different than the numbers printed on the card and the numbers that you tell to your friends of, oh yeah, my W number is this. It'd be really nice if there were unique, secret information on the actual card. So don't use the student's actual ID number. Definitely don't use sequential numbers. If I know that mine is ID 1000, my buddies could possibly be 1001 since they're sequential. So things that you should do, you should use a random number for this. And you don't want it to be any kind of predictable format. So as part of this, I've been dealing a lot with like physical IDs and thinking about this. So I wanted to look at how easy it would be to create a fake campus ID. So this is the older ID format. This is what's still used for most students. Not everybody's been moved over to the new ID system yet, but it's effectively a piece of plastic card that's the same for everybody. They print out your picture on a piece of laminate, and then they put the laminate over top of the card, and they press it together. And I figured this out because one of my friends has a very, very old ID card that's like peeling off, and I'm like, oh, that's cool, the photo's just on this clear part. So, if you wanted to make fake Southeastern ID cards, all you really need is a card printer. And they're online on Amazon for about $1,000, you could replicate a fake ID. Now you might be thinking, all right, well, if I can send ID numbers digitally, what would be the advantage of actually going the extra step and creating a fake ID? I can already get into buildings, I can already use Coke vending machines to take money off of people's accounts. Why would I need a physical ID? And the answer would be, if you actually wanted to make a purchase at a location, so for example, any of the convenience stores in Hammond, they take the Lions Lanyard as a form of payment. If you went to the university bookstore and you wanted to buy, say, a $1,000 laptop, you could do that with your university ID. So if you're going to be going out and about as a malicious actor and you wanted to make a big ticket $1,000 purchase on somebody else's behalf, you would actually need a physical ID. So the idea here would be to say, all right, what's the barrier to entry for a bad guy actually going out and making a huge fraudulent purchase? And the answer is anybody could do it if they have the knowledge and about $1,000 to buy a ID career. So let's look at some international standards. So these are the standards that are like for your credit card. And these are ISO standards and IEC standards. So there's like, I was looking online and I'm thinking like, all right, these college IDs, they're very easy to replicate, and it's harder for somebody to replicate like a credit card. So these specific standards are what our credit card companies are supposed to abide by that make credit cards harder to forge. So the first one has to deal with embossed characters. So that's like when you get a credit card and you feel the surface of it, it feels bumpy for all the letters. You have to have like an extra machine to be able to make the letters on a raised surface like that. So the next standard would be the account numbering system, and that's kind of what I mentioned before. Don't use sequential numbers. You want to use something random, something not predictable. And the third standard is for the actual data you're supposed to put on the mag stripe. So the idea here is your credit card isn't just like your credit card number. It's like, you know, your expiration date, so you have to go and get a new credit card every once in a while. Something like your whole name, and stuff like, you know, a PIN. You know, for example, if we had a PIN on our university ID card that we had to type in, that would be a little bit more secure because like my PIN would be different than, say, your PIN. So some lessons learned to prevent fake IDs. It'd be a good idea to follow these international standards that we've already got. Don't reinvent the wheel. The credit card companies have already figured out the hard stuff for us. These standards explain how to design like pretty decent stuff. So yeah, your credit card's a really good example of what we should strive for in terms of university IDs. Alright, so for the regional part of this, I went ahead and found some friends that went to other colleges, and I kind of asked them, hey, can can I take a picture of your ID? By the way, can I go ahead and scan all the data off of it too? And they're like, sure. And I'm like, I promise I'm not doing anything bad with it, really.
Do you at all?
They're like, oh yeah, that's just Garth. He's all right. He's not a bad guy. So yeah, this is what LSU is doing. They are actually the only one in the region that I found that are actually doing things the right way. So if you look, like, this is your LSU ID number. That's like our equivalent of a W number. And we see that that shows up at the beginning of the magstripe data in like the blue portion. But what we also see that makes us different from our Southeastern IDs is you've got this orange portion that's like super secret, big, scary, long, random number that's just on the ID card itself. So that orange part is what makes the ID cards unpredictable. I could predict the blue part if I knew your ID number, but I couldn't have any way of guessing what the orange part would be. So there'd be no way to construct the data necessary to create a fake LSU ID. So this is a good implementation, and sadly they're the only university that's doing it right. So we look at UNO, it's even shorter than Southeastern's mag data. So you've got your UNO number right there, and then that's what shows up in blue, and that's pretty much the only thing on this card. And this is used to get into dorms, to get into buildings. So they're doing things pretty similar to what we are. And I was gonna go ahead and paste in what the ID card data is for the new Southeastern IDs. But I didn't have time, it was kind of last minute, so I can go ahead and explain what you would see if you'd swipe this. So the new IDs kind of incorporated some of my findings with the old IDs. So the idea was that you want that random orange part that LSU has that differentiates your ID and makes it unpredictable. So that has been incorporated into the new Southeastern ID. So we're now doing things the way that LSU is doing things. So we're secure now. Going forward, if you're a student and you've got an ID that uses the new format, you're good. Now the bad part is that this ID hasn't yet been rolled out to everybody. So all the vending machines, all the card readers, all the point of sale systems still need to be able to read from the old format. So in a few years, once everybody's been moved over to the new ID, then they could stop doing things the old way and stop using just your ID number, and then we'll be a lot more secure. So we're on the right path to having a secure ID solution here. The other thing to note that's special about how we did things is that these are actually RFID wireless cards now. And when I figured that out, I was actually very scared because wireless things are lend themselves to being able to copy data easily. But I actually scanned the card, and it turns out that all the data on it is encrypted. And it uses private public key cryptography, and there is no actual way to replicate or steal the data off of this card. So in about a year or two, once everybody's moved over to this, we'll be good. We'll have a secure solution like LSU. All right, so those are the physical uses of an ID card. Let's talk about the digital uses online. So this is their old webpage if you were gonna add money to your account. The new one works exactly the same way, it just looks like it's not from the 90s. Yeah, you've basically got this field where you enter your W number, and then once you hit submit, it's like, hey, that's Garth. Is this right? And then you literally have to click yes or no because you could have typed in somebody else's ID on accident. And if you go ahead and click yes, you actually are able to like deposit money onto their account. So I mean, that's not too bad. You're kind of accessing somebody else's account. The only thing you can really do is gift the money. And the use for this is that, you know, parents would want to be able to gift money to like their kid that's in college. And like you wouldn't know your kid's password, but you might know what their ID number is. So there is a use for doing it this way. But the problem here is that if we're thinking about all we need to make a fake ID is your ID number, I could just type in any random ID number here, and if that's a valid ID number, it's going to tell me what the person's name is. So I can kind of use this to go fishing for valid students that are at Southeastern and what their ID numbers are. So I went ahead and made a program
to do just that.
And basically this thing guesses starting at 64,000, no wait, that's 642,000 through 642,020. And so it actually goes to the website, types in that ID number for me, and if it's valid, it goes ahead and spits the name back to me. So we can see that for my ID number, it pulls back my name. And it actually pulled back the names, and I've redacted them here, of these other students and what their ID numbers are. So now that's, if I were an attacker, from the public internet, I now have all the information I need without having to ever visit Southeastern's campus to be able to go ahead and create a fake ID for any one of these students. And that's a huge security concern. So I talked about the whole problem with this is that the only thing you're typing in to get to that page is like the person's ID number. And that's not how all universities do it. So you can actually go online. All universities and college campuses and like even hospital campuses use Seaboard's system, like their card swipe system and everything for identity management and payments. And actually it's very nice if you go to like this website, they give you a drop down with every single university that uses the system. So if you're an attacker and you want to know which universities you could hit, you could just go to that site and then visit the page and be like, oh, yeah. So here's another college. They look exactly like us, except there's these 2 extra fields. So now you can't go ahead and guess somebody's student ID. You have to have already known what their first and last name is in order to be able to get through. So for example, this university, I would not be able to use that attack against. And that's just by asking for somebody's name, and that's pretty much it. I mean, this meets the need for parents to be able to give money to their students. So this is how things should be done. So the bad news is that out of all the hundreds of universities online, there are about 97 in the US that do it the same way we do, where you just type the number in. So that's about 97 entities that an attacker could go ahead and potentially make fraudulent purchases on. So some lessons learned for ID enumeration. It's important to require more than just a sequential number to be able to access somebody's account. And if you're going to give them access to that person's account, don't go ahead and disclose extra information like, oh yeah, that ID number belongs to so-and-so, first name, last name. So, some other universities clearly thought that this system wasn't adequately protected. Some other universities wanted to require a password to be able to get to this page. But this is Seaboard system, and it's done the same way for every university. So it's kind of a canned solution. You've kind of got what Seaboard has to offer, which is your ID number and maybe your first and your last name. There's no real way to password protect this. There's no real way to integrate it with your university's login system. So what a lot of universities did is they used a captive portal, which is basically, if you click on the website for that university and you say, oh, I want to add money to my card, they make you log in with your ID and password for the university, and then they redirect you to the insecure canned solution that Seaboard provides. So the problem with this, these universities wanted to increase the security, and there were about 14 total that went to the effort of making a captive portal to try to improve things, but 12 of them did not configure the captive portal correctly, so you could just go to the old URL anyways. So the captive portal for these 12 universities offered no additional protection. But these universities thought it was a really good thing. Two of the universities actually did it right, and it actually protects. And you can't get to the website to get to somebody's card unless you already logged in. So lessons learned on captive portals. If you're going to use a captive portal, make sure you do it right. Make sure it actually works. And surprisingly, more places had broken captive portals than working captive portals. All right, so let's talk about like authentication and like logging in. Separate from the ID cards, this is where I'm going to talk about like just your account. So at Southeastern, we use single sign-on. So that's Microsoft Active Directory in this case. So that manages all the accounts and passwords for all the users on campus. And this is a good thing because single sign-on lets you use the same username and password to log into like all the systems that we've got. Moodle, Leonet. It's really nice because if you change your password somewhere, then you've changed your password everywhere. So how we have things set up at the university. For initial sign up, you log in with your birthday password. So your password right out the go, if you're a new student, it's going to be S plus your birthday. And we will see later why that is not a good idea. They also require you to input some security questions when you sign up for the first time. And then passwords are set to expire after about 6 months. So at this point, I want to draw attention to what NIST 800-171 can do for you. So this is a new standard that came out about 6 months ago, and NIST is like the big authority that tells us what good standards are in terms of security. They do more than just security, but that's what they're mainly known for. And this particular publication had to do with good measures of password security. So basically, they made these assertions that you should never, as an enterprise, you should never expire your users' passwords. And their idea behind this was that if a user is signing up for the first time, they're going to choose a good password. And if that password is good, and if their account has never been hacked, then that's still a secure password. Go ahead and let them keep using it. Don't expire the password because that might encourage the user to use the same password for multiple websites. That might also encourage the user to say, use the same password, change it, but then change it back. Or some users might just add a -2 at the end of their password. So NIST basically said, yeah, we don't want the user doing any of those things, so let's just let their password stay good forever. And in exchange, if you think that's not good enough for security, go ahead and use multi-factor authentication. So if you think that they're logging in from a suspicious location, go ahead and send them like a text message on their phone to confirm and make sure that it's really them. But it's okay for them to use the same password for a really long time. And they also made this other strong assertion, which was that you should never ever use security questions. Now this is a really common thing that almost all websites on the internet do right now. They expire passwords after a certain period of time, and they make you set security questions. So this was like a huge controversial publication coming from NIST, which was like this big standards organization. They're telling us all these things that we know to be true. We have to change how we're doing things now. So their logic behind not using security questions was that most of these questions that people are putting answers for don't uniquely identify. So it would be things like, what's your favorite color? My favorite color is statistically probably shared by somebody else in this room. So questions like this are not enough to securely protect your account. And we will see an example of this later, specifically why we shouldn't use security questions at Southeastern. So a case study would be hacking your boss's plural accounts. So Matt Gill and Ray Dejean have security questions, and there's something of the effect of, what street did you grow up on? So it's very easy, if you know Ray Dejean's full name, to look up who his father is online, and then it's easy to, from there, once you know who his father is, figure out where his father lived. Once you know that address, that's likely the address that Ray grew up on. So once you know the street that Ray grew up on, that's the answer to a security question. The other security question was like, what's your favorite sports team? And we're in Louisiana, so we know the answer to that has got to be the Saints. So yeah, I hacked not only Matt, but also Ray's account. So this is a good example of why NIST is right. We should not use security questions. Or if we do, try to make the question something that would get the user to provide a more unique response.
I love that Mr. Dejean's profile picture will now enter the Southeastern publication.
I think it's a picture of a man riding a unicorn, right?
Yeah, it's a unicorn.
Hey Garth, tell him why you didn't get into my account.
Yeah, so Mark
He took a shot at it.
went ahead and put just gibberish as the answer for his security questions.
I said I didn't want them to be able to guess it. I said if somebody has to recover it, it has to be him or Matt.
So I never got into his. I was about like halfway towards getting into Dr. Asude's account. His question was like, what's your favorite car? And I know he drives Mercedes, so I'm going through that. That wasn't it. And the other, I'm thinking to myself, well, there's only finitely many car manufacturers out there. Let's go to the top 20 list of like supercars. So I'm going through. And about halfway through, I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if this is going to lock him out of his account.
And that's when I got the phone call.
At that point, I'm like, all right, I don't want to lock Asude out of his account. Let me go test on my account. I hammer my account like 30 or 40 times with bad security questions, and I don't get anything. So at this point, I mean, I've been trying on like an hour for my own account. So I'm like thinking, well, it clearly never locks you out, so I'm good. So I go back to Dr. Asude's account, and about 30 or 40 more questions in of like top supercars that I'm trying to get into his account with. It eventually tells me something like, your account has been locked. An email has been sent to notify the person. And so I'm like, oh no. So it actually sent Dr. Asude an email. It's like some intruder is trying to log into your account. So that is a good measure to protect accounts with security questions. So his answers were just good enough to where I wasn't able to guess them right within like the first 30 or 40 tries. Now, if we had done the same thing for Matt and Ray, but instead of 30, 40 tries, made it like 3 or 4 tries, I might not have gotten into their accounts. So yeah, lessons learned: improving login security. Don't use security questions, or if you do, make sure the questions are very unique. Lockout periods are good. Alright, so here's another case study on authentication, specifically compromising new user accounts. So I mentioned that we use Microsoft Active Directory for a single sign-on in the university, and that has like, you know, your W number and like all of your information to log into your account. And I also mentioned that your initial password, if you're like a freshman, is S plus your birthday. So the idea would be that if you knew who freshmen were, like if you knew who all the freshmen were, which you have a very good idea because all the ID numbers are sequential. So if you start at something like, you know, 62,000, you're getting like new freshmen for that semester. And if you know what their birthday is, which isn't too hard to find, then you can actually go ahead and figure out that their password is S plus their birthday and go ahead and log in as them. So Microsoft Active Directory has a bunch of built-in directory features. We don't use most of them. Most of them are like, you know, your address, your phone number, where your office is located. These are things that an enterprise would use. We don't use them because we're a college campus. But some things we do use is birth date. So if you are a user of Southeastern, you can query anybody in the directory system. And this is designed for an enterprise so that, you know, if you're working in some certain department, that you can go and find somebody else in another department. You can just search for them, and then you can find out what their office number is and what their phone number is. So there's a useful purpose to having this directory feature. Fortunately, we have the birth date field provided here. So that's all that's needed to determine the password for a new user. So it's actually possible to compromise the accounts for all freshmen. So once you've determined the password and you've logged in as them, that user can now no longer log in because you're forced to change the password to something other than S plus your birthday. It wants you to set a good password. So if an attacker were to do that, the user would eventually find out because they would not be able to log in. So the user would go through the process of resetting their password, and the attacker would be kicked out of this person's account. However, there's a way to set up a backdoor so that if you're an attacker, you can maintain access to this person's account long term. And the backdoor of that is to go ahead and set security questions. So here's another example of why security questions are bad. So if you're an attacker, and you go ahead and log in for the first time, you can change the security questions to something that you as the attacker know. Then go ahead and change the user's password back to S plus their birthday. So now that that user can make their initial login, think that they've logged in for the first time because the password's what they expected it to be, and they're none the wiser. But you as the attacker now have the security questions that you need to go ahead and log back into their account at a later time. And that happens to be very useful if you're an attacker and you wanted to get something like the student's financial refunds. So if you register for a couple classes and you drop a few, you do it before a certain date, the university refunds that money to you. All university refunds use Bank Mobile, and on their website they claim something like, yeah, we're used by 97% of universities in the US. So this problem I'm about to talk about affects more than just Southeastern. It actually affects all universities that use a similar insecure initial password and use security questions. So Bank Mobile, in order to set up a way to get refunds, you log in your email and then you get sent a personal identification code. So this, for example, is my personal identification code. The problem with Bank Mobile is that this code never changes. So if you're able to log into a user's email at any point in time, even though they're a freshman and this is their first semester, you go ahead and set up Bank Mobile for that user. You get their personal identification code. You go ahead and change their password back to S plus their birthday. Delete the emails that mention anything about you setting up Bank Mobile on their behalf. And now you have everything you need to go back and access their account and get their refunds, say at the end of the semester, or later on if they, for example, got a scholarship. I didn't figure out that we used Bank Mobile until like a few weeks ago when I got a small scholarship, and I'm like, who is this person and why are they offering me money? And it turns out that this is like how we do refunds at almost all colleges. So yeah, this is a huge problem. So lessons learned for securing initial signup is quite simply don't use birthday as a password. A good idea would be to mail a user a random password, or text them a random password, or email them something with their own personal email that they've already got. There are a number of ways to give them a thing that they know to be their password that doesn't have to be a personally identifiable piece of information like their birthday. So that's kind of like the authentication side of things, of like logging in and the securities that we've got. So this goes into, let's change gears and talk about accounts and systems. In other words, why all that authentication stuff matters. So system security is different than authentication security, because the last section kind of looked at how there were some vulnerabilities in the authentication process. And those were flaws with the actual process of signing up or logging in or using reset passwords. And that was a problem with the process of authentication. So what I'm going to talk about here is system problems. So problems that are separate from the authentication flow. Problems that would still be present, say, if we fixed all the stuff for authentication security. There would still be some system security flaws, and these would still have some consequences. So I'd like to point out again, SSO is really important. The fact that we use Microsoft Active Directory to have the same password on all our systems, that's really, really good. A lot of universities don't do this. A lot of universities have 5 or 10 different websites, and they make you sign up and set a password for each one. But we have single sign-on, and that's a step in the right direction for us. So, for some of the systems on campus, there are 1 or 2 that don't have single sign-on integration. And the problem is that these 1 or 2 systems have passwords that are really, really old. So when your password policy is dictated by your single sign-on system in Active Directory, and you've got like 1 or 2 small systems out there that are just outside the boundaries and don't use single sign-on, they're not controlled by those password policies. So expirations aren't a thing. So this is the case for our campus's HVAC system. It's a very old website from the 90s. It doesn't have single sign-on authentication. So all the password policies that we have with Active Directory, like expiring your password or making sure it's strong, don't apply for this really old system. There's a particular vulnerability where you can navigate to the website and actually download the password database of all the users. Now, the good thing is that because they're not using single sign-on, I can't go ahead and log into the directory of physical plant personal email with this password, because this is an old password that he set back in the 90s. But what it does mean is that I can go ahead now and log into the HVAC system as this user, and that's because this is such an old password and it wasn't a forced expiration. It didn't follow any of the other security policies that we have. So yeah, you can actually go ahead and log into the HVAC system. And here's Fared, for example. This is one of the air handler units in Fared. So you could actually control AC and like make it like super hot or super cold in any building that you please. So yeah, some lessons learned is that single sign-on is a good thing, and it keeps all of our systems secure. And because of that, we should use it everywhere. Single sign-on could have prevented this from happening. So another case study, back to like user accounts. This isn't account stuff. This is still system security. So these are shortcomings of the various enterprise systems that we have. So specifically Leonet. So Leonet has this way where if you log in, it lets you view your tax form at the end of the year. So if you're a student, that would be a 1098-T. And the idea is once you go ahead and click on this, if you open it up, just from being able to log in as that person, you are now able to access that student's social security number. So for example, if you know, say, 9,000 freshmen and their initial password, you are now able to get their social security numbers. So method 2 of accessing social security numbers, there is a IRS form, W-9S, and I think this is like a thing that the IRS requires like all enterprises and colleges to do. And it basically means that like everybody at that university has to verify that their social security number is correct. Like pretty much every year you have to log in and like type in your birthday to log in, and they're like, oh yeah, this is your whole social security number, and here's your home address. Does that information look right? And you pretty much click yes or no, and they ask you to do this every year as a student. The problem with this is that the only barriers to entry are you have to log into Leonet and you have to type in the person's date of birth. Now, if you just hacked a freshman's account and their password was their birthday, and it's asking you to enter their birthday again as an additional security measure, that's not an additional security measure. So you're now able to access these social security numbers for all freshmen with two different methods. So method 3, if you're a student worker, you have your HR system in Leonet. And this is actually the nice one if you were an attacker, because it gives you more information than just your social. So if you were to like log in to the HR system, you would see this page, and we've already got that social from other methods. But there's this other part where you can actually view your entire bank account and routing number if you're a student worker. And this requires no additional methods of authentication. Once you're logged in, you can go ahead and just see your routing and account number. And that would be a problem if you were a student worker that had just signed up with the university. Your birthday password is good for 6 months because that's when it expires. So if you're like a really good freshman and you happen to get a job as a student worker and you're getting paid direct deposit to your bank account, and an attacker found out how to do this, they would actually be able to go ahead and drain that student's personal bank account with this information. And the nice thing about the HR system is that in addition to providing the social security number, it also provides your home address. And Leonet also provides your personal cell phone number. So I wrote a script that, remember the other program that goes ahead and determines all of the ID numbers and what their initial passwords were. That program outputs all the username and passwords to a spreadsheet. I wrote another program that takes that spreadsheet in, and given a username and password, we actually go and log into Leonet and go ahead and fetch that user's social security number, their home phone number, and their address. So this is a completely automated solution that would be able to dump like all of the personal information. And the question here would be, what's the high score? So when I first looked at this in fall of 2016, I was able to see 8,497 freshmen or faculty for which this program would actually work and dump their phone number, address, social, and one of these students was a student worker at the time within 6 months of entering college, and it would have been possible to get their bank account. Now, the important thing to note is that on this previous page, you may notice that I'm actually just looking up my own W number again and again. I'm doing that because for testing, I don't actually want to go out and steal everybody's social security number. I actually respect people's privacy. I'm not going to go ahead and go and steal everybody's information. I just want to make sure that this really cool, awesome program works on my account, and that's where I draw the line here. So yeah, I know if the attacker did this, they could get close to 9,000 socials in a bank account, but I'm not actually going to do that. I'm just going to observe, hey, here's how many students I know that haven't changed their password, but let me just leave their accounts alone and not do anything with it. Yeah, so some lessons learned for protecting personal information. It's really important that these systems use more than just the password to let you see your social, let you see your bank account. Ideally, I don't really see any reason why you would ever need to see what your bank account and routing number would be. I don't know why that would need to be a feature. So it'd be a good idea to go ahead and exclude that information from systems like that. And for the other example where in Leonet you have to verify your social every year, and they ask you to enter your date of birth as an additional security protection, it's a good idea to make sure that we use actual additional security protections, not the date of birth that we already know. Maybe something like multi-factor authentication, send them a text message, Let's actually make sure that the user is who they say they are. So some closing remarks. This is a whole lot of information. Let's look at what we learned. So we learned with physical IDs how to stop fraudulent purchases with effective digital identification. We learned how to design better physical ID cards and stop forgery. We also looked at the ID card solutions from other campuses in the region. For online IDs, we looked at how to prevent ID enumeration. So instead of asking for just the ID number, go ahead and ask them for their ID number and their first and last name so that an attacker on the internet can't just enter any old random number and see valid students. We also saw how to assess the effectiveness of captive portals. We saw that more universities implemented that incorrectly than the ones that implemented it correctly. So for authentication, we saw how to improve login security, how to better secure initial sign-up. For accounts and systems, we saw exactly why SSO was important. For example, if we had SSO, we could have prevented the entire HVAC system from getting hacked. And we also see with accounts and systems how we can improve systems so that we protect users' personal information. So thanks shall be given to the following people. I'd like to thank Matt Gill for the encouragement to actually try to make a fraudulent purchase on Ray's account and actually buy a soda. That's kind of what started the whole thing. I basically told Matt, hey, I think I can steal money off of any student's account. And Matt was like, oh, that sounds awesome. I don't believe you. Come back and talk to me when you bought a Coke. So I bought a Coke on Ray Dejan's account, and that's kind of what started this whole thing. I'd also like to thank Claire and Dr. Burris for helping me with this honors presentation. And I'd also like to thank my coworkers who have put up with my crazy antics, especially for being really cool about this and trying not to get me thrown in jail for doing all these crazy things. And if you're not asleep yet, go ahead and ask me some questions. Yes.
Hey, by the way, real quick. Very good.
Yeah.
2 slides before this.
Yes.
From DEFCON 5, least severe, to DEFCON 1, most severe.
Oh boy.
Those 9 things.
This is probably the most important thing because right now, a lot of universities across the United States, it's possible to just buy like $1,000 MacBooks from every student out there and then liquidate that for like tens of thousands of dollars. So in terms of cybercrime, that's your biggest thing. Like there's like a loss of money here. This is like probably like number 3. I would rank that, like physical ID card security. If you're able to fake a physical ID card, that's going to let you do 2 things. You can go to the bookstore and buy somebody's MacBook, or you could go and break into the dorms. Now, for the case of getting into the dorms, I don't really think that gains you anything, because you then have to know what group number that card is good for, and you're not going to know that information as an attacker. So it's just going to get you in the building, not in a dorm room. So that's kind of a physical security concern, because anybody off the street could go wandering around in the dorms, but that's not really a huge concern because you're not actually getting in anybody's room. So yeah, I'd say that's probably 3. So this basically says that for the stuff that I found in this in-depth research at Southeastern, we know UNO is just as bad, or at least at the point in time that my friend's ID was printed, which was like 5 or 10 years ago. It's possible they may have fixed those problems since then. I have no idea. I'm highly doubtful because we didn't just get like a secure solution until this year, and it hasn't even been fully rolled out yet. So it's possible UNO is still living in the dark ages. So yeah, I would say like rank 2 or 3 for that. That's basically just saying you can do it more than just at Southeastern. Stopping ID enumeration. The only thing that gets you is the name of somebody. So if you wanted to get a student roster of everybody that goes to a university, that would kind of be considered private information. but it's not too important. I would rank that at like least priority, rank 5. Stopping ID enumeration. The only thing that could be used for that would be really important is if you wanted to figure out somebody's name and a valid ID number so that you could then go ahead and make like a fake ID card. That could be very useful to an attacker. But if you've already got an effective ID card situation, that shouldn't be possible anyway. You should only be getting a user's name. Doing this thing on this online website shouldn't get you all the information you now need to do like fraudulent purposes. So that on its own, I would say that's like at least priority 5. Captive portals only stop ID enumeration, so that's even of a less priority. Authentication, so improving login security. That's the initial password thing where you don't want to let somebody in by just knowing somebody else's birthday. I would say that in itself isn't that bad. Like, at most you're getting into somebody's assignments. You could maybe submit fake assignments. You could maybe make them look like a bad guy by sending some nasty emails on their behalf. Maybe you could snoop through their emails and get some personal information. But in itself, authentication as it pertains to a college shouldn't get you very much unless you're a new faculty member that just got hired on within the last 6 months. If your password is your birthday, then that enables an attacker to log in as that faculty member and potentially change grades. But we do see that because of some of the systems on campus, having a lack of login security means that you can then dump all the personal information for that user. So, I would say that that's probably ranked to almost top priority. But this I would still say is top priority because, loss of money. Securing the initial sign up, that's the birthday thing. I would probably say that's like almost a top priority, like rank 2. Accounts and systems. SSO is really important. I gave like an example of hacking HVAC. I mean, there's not really huge consequences to that, except that everybody's all, bothered when they're trying to take an exam. It's like super hot in a classroom. But there are other systems that other universities use where they don't have single sign-on everywhere, and it's not just an HVAC system. It's like literally every other system is their own account system. So I would rank that at like probably mid-level for importance. Having single sign-on means that you get like the single cohesive password policy gets to apply everywhere. So if you've got a good password policy, all your systems are good. That's probably mid-level. And this last one, protecting personal information, that's probably, if not rank 1, I would consider like person's like social security numbers and bank accounts like as important as being able to like do a fraudulent purchase. These could both equate to the same amount of monetary loss, so they would both be of the highest priority. Any other questions?
Good job, Gordon.
Great. Well, thanks.
Just a process